Let's raise some big questions. AI in the US, ring of fire in the neighborhood. Will Quad give India greater global leverage? What should be India's role in Quad? Is neighborhood becoming our big challenge? Can Quad tackle an aggressive China? Joining me now, Jehan Perera is Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka, joins us from Colombo. Singh, former Secretary MEA, Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, and Michael Kugelman, Director, South Asia Institute, joining us. Let's come to each of you on that big question which I have raised today. Are we seeing an emergence of a new alliance through Quad to contain China? Is my opening question, and I will get each of you to respond to that. Starting with you, Singh, your first reactions to what we've seen with the Quad. Are you seeing India now positioning itself along with America, Japan and Australia to maintain peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region as a counter to China?
No, Rajdeep, this meeting was important not because it was going to be path-breaking or something new has happened. This was the last meeting that President Biden is taking. He's the one who elevated it to the leadership level 4 years ago. And also the other lame duck in that is the Japanese Prime Minister. Therefore, two members who are lame duck, who are soon giving up power. And you got the rumblings of a Trump in the background, whose approach to Quad is unknown because he can be an isolationist and he can be quite different. And therefore, this was more a case of continuity. Most of the themes have been known for a long time. Open Pacific, open Indo-Pacific. So thematically, you add just small little bits each time and try taking it forward. Essentially, Quad is a non-military alliance which is countering China through non-military means. So let's not read too much into the into a military dimension into it. So therefore, it's how to deny technology to China, how to contain it, how to rival China's Belt and Road Initiative, and therefore development assistance, healthcare, cancer treatment. What they did during COVID times, do that. So I think it's realized by, and India's always supported this, is that you have to meet China by multiple means. And the military one is not the only one.
Let me bring in Michael Kugelman, therefore, from Washington on that. Michael Kugelman, when I read the Wilmington Declaration joint statement by Quad leaders, interesting elements are: we strongly oppose unilateral actions to change status quo by force or coercion. We seek regions where no country dominates and no country is dominated, a region where all countries are free from coercion. Clearly, the aim is somewhere to contain China. But can you really contain China with non-military means? Can the Quad really work in that direction?
Well, I would argue that the Quad serves both security and non-security purposes. I mean, indeed, as was noted before, there are a number of non-security related initiatives that are meant to counter China. This notion of working together to provide public goods throughout the Indo-Pacific, whether you're talking about clean energy technologies or infrastructure, the idea there is to provide something that the region sees as a better alternative to what it's getting from China. So the strategic component is always there. This is always about countering China. But that said, there are security components to the Quad. It's of course not an alliance, but one of the major takeaways from this latest summit is that the four decided to sign an agreement to work together on maritime cooperation to counter illegal fishing, and that clearly is directed at China. There's also plans for the four coast guards to work together. So I think that the Quad has very effectively blended both security and non-security tactics in efforts to counter China's rising influence and increasingly provocative acts.
And do you see it, Michael, lasting beyond President Biden's term, irrespective of who comes to power in the United States in November?
Well, I mean, if we agree that the China factor is a big part of what makes the Quad be successful, then the answer is definitely yes, because I think that there's strong bipartisan support in Washington around the idea that great power competition, U.S.-China competition, is one of the core U.S. foreign policy challenges. So I think that regardless of who wins the presidency, you're going to see, from a U.S. perspective, continuity, and I think that there'll be a strong embrace of the Quad. I mean, the Quad first began to become re-energized and resurface during the Trump administration. Let's keep that in mind. So I think that if Trump returns to the presidency, I imagine that he would be enthusiastic about building on what the Quad has become at this point.
I just for a moment want to shift from the Quad and I'll bring in Kanwal Sibal and Jehan Perera. You, Mr. Perera, first. You're our guest from Colombo because we've seen today a bit of history being created in Colombo. The first Marxist president, if I may be allowed to use that word, for Mr. Desai Naike is being sworn in. And many see that this will lead to a shift in in Sri Lanka's focus once again towards China at the cost of India. Is that being too simplistic? The JVP in the past has had an anti-India stand, but much water has flown under the Park Strait since then. Do you see Mr. Desai Naike moving distinctly closer to China or not?
Well, not only has the JVP been in the past anti-India, they've also engaged in insurrections, 2 insurrections against the Sri Lankan state. But I would say that things have changed very much now. Mm-hmm. I would actually hesitate to call President Desai Naike a communist because I don't see him that way. I see him now as a mainstream politician. His alliance that won the election is called the National People's Power. It is no longer the JVP. The JVP is the core element of it, but the National People's Power is certainly not seen by the people as a communist alliance. And people voted for President Desai Naike because they want a corruption-free administration, because corruption is so endemic and people see the economic collapse that took place in Sri Lanka in 2022, which India helped us get out of, as being due solely, primarily to corruption. So this will vote for honest government, clean government. And I also don't agree that the new government, the president, is going to be a sort of a tool of China.
But the JVP is considered close to China. You don't see, therefore, Desai Naike allowing China to increase its circle of influence in Sri Lanka?
I mean, I don't think, I mean, the JVP, perhaps in the past, they were close to China, but I think now they are Sri Lankan nationalists. They are for Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And I think, and they visited India. They visited India in February of this year, and Desai Naike came and spoke very well of India. I really don't see them as becoming a tool. I mean, they are aware of India's security, and they're always very conscious of it. They speak of it.
Okay. Kanwal Sibal, it's interesting how India's sort of foreign outreach seems to be increasingly successful in Washington. The Quad seems to have been strengthened this week, even as domestically we are surrounded or encircled by what many believe is a ring of fire. We've seen what happened in Bangladesh last month. We've seen a major change in Sri Lanka. We've seen anti-Indian sentiments in the Maldives. We know how Pakistan responds, Afghanistan, Myanmar. So in the region itself, we have multiple challenges, even as we seem to be increasingly successful globally in our attempts to somehow contain China with the United States, Japan, Australia also with us.
Two things. What you've said about India is true of China too. They have extremely difficult relations in the neighborhood. In fact, it is worse for them because they're pitted against the world's foremost nuclear power, which has bases there, which have military deployments in the region, which has alliances in the region, and yet China has all this while spread its wings worldwide and has established itself as a power at the global level, challenging the United States of America. Or you look at the United States. It can't handle Nicaragua, it can't handle Maduro in Venezuela, it can't handle Cuba. It's unable to deal with the situation in the Middle East with all the power that it had, but yet it has a global policy of its own and it pursues it. Russia is involved in a collapse of its ties with Europe and is involved in a conflict, but look at the way they are spreading their wings in Africa. They have achieved a great deal of success there. Likewise, in Asia, they have done quite a bit in terms of establishing. So India is not unique in this case. Therefore, let's not make this analysis that because our neighborhood is troubled, therefore somehow we have failed in our policy, and therefore it's in contradiction with our global image or the global exercise of our influence. That's one aspect.
But how do we manage? Are you not worried about an increasing Chinese sphere of influence in our neighborhood?
No, the Chinese influence was always there. Even in Sri Lanka, Bikram and Singh was very much made a lot of gestures towards China. He attended the BRI forum. He was present there. He supported the BRI. So it's not as if he's not done that. But with Dasan Naike, as has already been said, there is a change of mood in Sri Lanka. They have seen actually the way we help Sri Lanka. Any sensible Sri Lankan leader would realize that India is a very vital partner. And the problems it faced last time can happen again because they have to go to the IMF. There will be, demands made on them to control inflation, to control public spending, and all the usual conditionalities that come to the IMF. And therefore, they'll have to turn to somebody. And India is always there.
Okay.
With Muzo, let me complete. In Muzo, in Maldives, there's been a change. He's become very positive towards India relatively, which is a good thing. In case of Nepal, there has been constant change of governments. Their politics is totally unstable, but Prime Minister has met Modi in New York. Bangladesh is a new problem, but let's see how the wind blows in there, because at the end of the day, the connections that have been established, the connectivities and the economies that have been tied together in so many ways in terms of our power supplies and everything else, I think the new government, when it settles down, when elections take place, they'll realize that the relationship with India is very important.
Okay.
But it's not that we have a stable and very friendly neighborhood, but we'll be able to manage the situation.
Okay, you believe it can be contained, it should not be seen as something new or changing at the moment. KC Singh, you want to respond to what you're hearing? You heard Michael Kugelman also seemingly suggesting that the Quad can play an important role, that India, even with a Trump, should there be a Trump administration come November, there will be an even greater commitment to Quad. Has the Modi government got it right in the manner that we pushed Quad at the same time, even while in the region itself, we seem to be encircled?
No, as Mr. Sibal said, it can't be unidimensional. All foreign policy is multidimensional. And you have to do multitasking. So you have to manage local crises, you have to reach out, and you have to have your core values. But I think one of the problems that particularly the BJP government will have in handling the neighborhood is the excessive majoritarianism. Because you look at the neighborhood, there's only one Hindu power next to us, and that is Nepal. And Nepal has been taken over by the communists. And for them, any Hindu nationalism means the old ruling family, and they don't want it. So the ones who are Hindu don't want this Hindu nationalism. And then all around us, there are the Muslim countries, there are two Buddhist countries. So it becomes easy to know what is happening in Bangladesh. Jamaat-e-Islami has been unshackled. They will definitely come in with a more right-wing Islamist approach whenever there's a government, and once BNP wins, then the old alliance comes back. No, Americans may have made a mistake. At the moment, they may think that they've got a Nobel laureate who can handle Bangladesh. But when the elections come in, then that is where Americans normally go wrong. In a popular election, they're not able to control the outcome. Nobody can. We can't. Americans can't.
But have we got the point? Have we, while we are encircled by this ring of fire here in the neighborhood, seemingly, have we got our global strategy when it comes to the United States particularly right this time? We've managed to somehow or the other over the last few years slowly institutionalize Quad as a possible bloc that can contain China.
Rajdeep, this has not started with the BJP today. I was additional secretary in the ministry when the first meeting at the additional secretary level in 2006 took place on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit. So I attended that meeting. But then what happened is the change of prime minister, Abe left in Japan, and the conservative government fell in Australia. And that brought about the change, and so it was put aside. And then, as it was just mentioned, during Trump's time, because they were focusing on China, they revived it. And Biden has taken it up to the leadership level.
Right.
So it's not a new idea. It's an idea which probably the time had not fully come at that stage. When Abe came back as prime minister, so it's not just Trump.
Okay.
When Abe came back as prime minister, he pushed for its revival. And that is when the foreign minister level started. And then, of course, Biden took it to the leadership level.
So you're saying it's been continuous. It's not been as if this was something that has just started in the last couple of years. There's been an element of continuity. But Michael Kugelman, do you see it being taken to the next level? given that China remains or is seen by all members of the Quad and other countries also as a potential threat to future stability in this region?
Well, I mean, as I think was mentioned earlier, this Quad summit, the joint statement that came out of it, it had some of the strongest language used to date about the South China Sea and the provocations there. And clearly the reference was to China. So clearly the four countries, the four Quad members, are now comfortable with that level of rhetoric. I imagine if the U.S. had its druthers, it would have wanted to mention China specifically in the joint statement, but I imagine several of the others did not agree. But look, here is where I think the India factor in the Quad looms large. If you want to talk about next phases, next steps, what makes India so important for being in the Quad is the geography, among other things. The three other Quad countries are Pacific powers. They're based in East Asia, and they're in the Pacific part of the Indo-Pacific. India is located in the Indian Ocean region, and the neighbors, the countries that we've been talking about that are posing challenges to India now, they are very much a part of the Indo-Pacific as well. And when we talk about how the Quad looks to develop public goods and offer them to countries around the region to try to get them to have a better option than what they might be getting offered from China, I think in theory that applies to the South Asian states as well, to India's neighbors. So I think that if we can look to a Quad in the future where there's more efforts to deliver these goods, not just to East Asia, but also to countries in South Asia as well. But that said, I think that there's always going to be some constraints. I think one of the big issues with the Quad over the last 2 years has been the Russia factor. I think they've been able to work through that despite India's different position from the others. And I think that there is going to always be that level of uncertainty because the Quad is not a formal institution. It doesn't have letterhead. It doesn't have a secretariat. So what we have to look for in terms of a signpost over the next few years, will the leaders' summits keep happening? There almost wasn't one this year. So I think that continuity will be a really important thing to watch.
Well, India is hoping to host the next Quad summit in 2025. Jehan Perera, let me once again come back to the neighborhood. You seem to suggest that the new government in Sri Lanka recognizes the importance of India, recognizes the support India gave Sri Lanka during its economic crisis a couple of years ago. Do you therefore believe there's a broad consensus across the political spectrum in Sri Lanka of the need to have strong ties with India, irrespective of the JVP's past?
Yes, I agree. I think that Sri Lanka learned two lessons. One, in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, that we needed to be cognizant of India's security interests when we were fighting the LTT war. Secondly, we saw the importance of India as a backup, as a friend, as a support during the time of the economic collapse in 2022. I think these are lessons that the entire Sri Lanka have learned. Of course, we will want to do business with China. We will want Chinese investments. But we will also be aware that India's security interests will come foremost. We will do trade with India. There's a lot of interest. Both President Wickremesinghe, who's the outgoing president, he wanted to form a land bridge with India. The new president, he went to India and he's come back and he speaks about Indian technology, Indian assistance. So I'm confident that that we want to be close to India, the people want to be close, and it's across all parties.
Right. So in conclusion, therefore, Kanwal Sibal, very quickly, to those who will say that Narendra Modi's government needs to perhaps refocus a bit on the neighborhood, what would you tell them? Would you tell them that they should? Should there be a shift in some way, given that you've got Europe, which is in turmoil, West Asia, which is in turmoil? Where should India be looking? At the neighborhood or at strengthening Quad and global institutions?
These are not mutually exclusive. We should work with the neighborhood, do the best we can, engage our neighborhood, strengthen our connectivity with the neighborhood, make them part of our economic rise, if you like. Give them benefits, not always necessarily absolutely reciprocal.
But the Modi years, if I may be allowed to say so, has seen the virtual collapse of SAARC, for example.
SAARC is a different matter altogether.
So are you saying those kind of regional cooperations do not exist? We need stronger bilateral ties within the region using our influence.
Firstly, that, and secondly, we've tried to build up BIMSTEC, but it's become more difficult with the problem in Myanmar because Myanmar are part of BIMSTEC, and in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is not part of BIMSTEC. But nevertheless, we try to build a larger Southeast Asian and Southeast Asian kind of a forum with Thailand and Myanmar in it, but it hasn't quite worked. But it's something that we need to keep working on. So I don't think that we have to give up all our efforts that we need to make in our neighborhood to try and bring them close to each other. At the same time, since we are a rising power, we now have global footprint. We want to take the leadership of the global South in many ways. We are able to talk to all countries, to even countries which are adversarial to each other. We had a very successful G20 presidency. We are getting support, even though I don't think it's going to materialize in the near future, for a permanent membership of the Security Council. We are active in so many international forums. We are part of BRICS, we are part of SCO, we are part of Quad. We have strengthened our ties enormously with the United States of America. We're wanting to sign an FTA with Europe. So we're acting on so many fronts. Look at the ITU2 and, of course, the Middle East, India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Of course, the ITU2 is not going to work because of what's happened in Israel and in the Gaza area. But in terms of the Middle Eastern corridor, I think progress can be made in the southern part of the corridor. From India to the Middle East, the northern will have to wait till the situation in the Middle East stabilizes. So there are so many opportunities opening for us. We are strengthening our ties.
Mr. Sibal, I'm going to have to stop you because I'm going to have to stop you there because we're getting some breaking news that's coming in, which has been flashing on the screen. But I appreciate my guest joining us and giving us the big picture of how the global dialogue that India has initiated in the United States and, of course, the repercussions also in Sri Lanka and the neighborhood. Thank you all very much for joining me.